Good afternoon. I begin with a quotation, well known, from Elder Bruce McConaughey, abbreviated. Forget everything I have said, or what Brigham Young or whomsoever has said, that is contrary to the present revelation, the 1978 revelation on priesthood. We spoke with a limited understanding and without the light and knowledge that has now come into the world. This statement by Elder McConaughey in August of 1978 is an apt characterization of the doctrine and apologetic commentary so pervasive in the church prior to the revelation on priesthood earlier that year. That is, it was all based on limited understanding. Yet it is not clear how wide an application Elder McConaughey intended for his reference to limited understanding. For ironically, the doctrinal folklore that many of us thought had been discredited, or at least made moot by the 1978 revelation, continued to appear in Elder McConaughey's own books, written well after 1978, and continues to be taught by well-meaning teachers and leaders in the church to this very day. The tragic irony is that the dubious doctrines in question are no longer even relevant, since they were contrived to explain, quote-unquote, a church policy that was abandoned 25 years ago. Indeed, it was apparent to many of us even 4 decades ago that certain scriptural passages used to explain the denial of priesthood to black members could not legitimately be so interpreted without an a priori narrative. Such a narrative was gradually constructed by the searching and inventive minds of early LDS apologists. With allusions to the books of Genesis, Moses, and Abraham, the scenario went something like this. In the pre-existence, certain of the spirits were set aside in God's wisdom to come to earth through a lineage that was cursed and marked, first by Cain's fratricide and obeisance to Satan, and then again later by Ham's lèse-majesté against his father Noah. We aren't exactly sure why this lineage was set apart in the pre-existence, but it was probably for reasons that do not reflect well on the premortal valiancy of the partakers of that lineage. Since the beginning, the holy priesthood has been withheld from all who have had any trace of that lineage, and so it shall be until all the rest of Adam's descendants have received the priesthood, or for all practical purposes, throughout the mortal existence of humankind. That was the standard scenario. Neat and coherent as that scenario might seem, the scriptures typically cited in its support cannot be so interpreted unless we start with the scenario itself and project it retrospectively upon the scriptural passages in proof text fashion. For if we set aside the darkened glass of this contrived scenario, we see that the book of Abraham says nothing about lineages set aside in the pre-existence, but only about distinguished individuals. Abraham is the only place, furthermore, that any scriptures speak of the priesthood being withheld from any lineage. But even then, it is only the specific lineage of the pharaohs of Egypt, and there is no explanation as to why that lineage could not have the priesthood, or whether the proscription was temporary or permanent, or which other lineages, if any, especially in the modern world, would be covered by that proscription. At the same time, the passages in Genesis and Moses, for their part, do not refer to any priesthood proscription, and no color change occurs in either Cain or Ham, or even in Ham's son Canaan, who for some unexplained reason was the one actually cursed. There is no description of the mark on Cain except that the mark was supposed to protect him from vengeance. It is true that in the 7th chapter of Moses, we learn that the descendants of Cain became black, but not until the time of Enoch, 6 generations after Cain. And then only in a vision Enoch was having about an unspecified future time. I'm referring to chapter 7, verses 2 to 4. There is no explanation for this blackness in the book of Moses, It is not even clear that we are to take it literally. Now, much of this conventional explanation for the priesthood restriction was simply borrowed from the racist heritage of the 19th century Europe and America, especially from the slavery justifications of the antebellum South. Understandable, even forgivable, as such a resort might have been for our LDS ancestors, it is neither understandable nor forgivable in the 21st century. It is an unnecessary burden of misplaced apologetics that has been imposed by our history upon the universal and global aspirations of the church. Until we dispense with it once and for all, it will continue to encumber the efforts of today's church leaders and public affairs spokespersons to convince the world, and especially the black people of America, that the church is for all God's children, black and white, bond and free, male and female. Once we have dispensed with the old explanation, however, what can we offer instead? How can we explain to those inside and outside the church who ask us about the erstwhile doctrines and policies of the church on racial matters? Let me answer that question by asking you to listen in on an imaginary conversation between me and one of my college students. I have never had precisely this conversation, but it is a composite of many that I have had over the years with members, non-members, and LDS youth. In what follows, A will stand for myself, Armand, and Q will stand for questioner, providing the usual Q&A format. And usually I'll dispense with the Q&A because you'll be able to tell which is Q and which is A. Q is always shorter. So, first Q question. I hear the Mormon Church is racist, or at least that many Mormons are. Anything to that rumor? A. I guess most white people in America have grown up with some racist beliefs, and Mormons have had their share. However, national polling data for more than a decade have revealed that Mormons are now actually less likely than other Americans, on average, to support racist ideas and policies. Q. But aren't black people unwelcome in the Mormon Church or subjected to some kind of second-class status? A. Not for the past 25 years. It is true that from the middle of the 19th century until 1978, the few black people who joined the church could not be given the priesthood. Q. Why was that? A. The reasons are not entirely clear, but the policy seems to have begun in 1852 with an announcement by Brigham Young, who was church president at that time. He made that announcement as part of the debate in the Utah Territorial Legislature over the legal status of both blacks and Indians, and in particular whether slavery should be permitted in the territory. Q. So was it permitted? Yes, for about a decade. That sounds pretty racist to me. How do you justify that? I wouldn't try to justify it. Slavery in America was a racist institution. Brigham Young himself did not actually believe in slavery, but he did believe that black people were not the social or intellectual equals of white people, and that slavery should be tolerated for Mormon slaveholders moving to Utah as long as it was tolerated elsewhere in the United States. So why would Brigham Young believe such things? Answer. Because he was a 19th century American, and hardly any white people of that time, north or south, believed in equality for blacks. Slavery was still an unsettled issue throughout the nation. Some, even in the South, were opposed to it. Many, even in the North, were willing to tolerate it. Brigham Young's ideas were really right in the mainstream of American thinking at that time. They were very close to the ideas of other prominent Americans, from Thomas Jefferson to Abraham Lincoln, who himself did not even free all the slaves with his Emancipation Proclamation.